Ready! There we go!
What does it mean when a country does not host permanent foreign bases, yet suddenly opens 9 strategic doors to the world's most powerful military? And more importantly, why now? In early 2023, Manila and Washington quietly crossed a threshold that had been avoided for decades. 4 new locations were added under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, lifting U.S. access from 5 to 9 Philippine sites. No fanfare, no base-building ceremonies, just a map that suddenly looked very different and far more consequential. Picture the geography for a second. Northern Luzon sits within reach of the Taiwan Strait. Palawan faces the South China Sea head-on. These are not abstract points on a strategist's slide. They are fishing grounds, runways, coastal towns, and supply routes that Filipinos live with every day. When access was extended to Naval Base Camilo Osias, Lal-lo Airport, Camp Melchor Dela Cruz, and Balabac Island, the message was not theoretical. It was geographic. These sites sit astride the corridors through which any Taiwan contingency or South China Sea crisis would inevitably flow. To understand the weight of this move, comparison matters. Japan hosts large, permanent U.S. bases, fixed, visible, and politically entrenched. South Korea does the same, anchored by the Korean Peninsula's unresolved war. Australia, by contrast, favors rotational access and logistics hubs spread across vast distances. The Philippines has chosen a fourth model: strategic access without permanent basing. No flags lowered, no sovereignty ceded.
Your right lateral limit is your individual target.
So yung lateral limit, yung...
Yet in practical terms, the United States can now pre-position equipment, rotate forces, and operate from locations that sit closer to potential flashpoints than almost any other allied territory. This is not a sudden pivot pulled from thin air. It rests on a long memory. The 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty established the alliance when Asia was still reeling from World War II. EDCA, signed in 2014, modernized that framework for an era of gray zone coercion, missile ranges, and maritime pressure. What changed in 2023 was urgency. China's activities in the West Philippine Sea intensified. Taiwan's security calculus hardened, and Manila reached a sober conclusion shared quietly across Southeast Asia. Geography does not allow neutrality on paper to function in practice. At its core, this expansion is less about America coming back, and more about the Philippines deciding where it stands in an increasingly crowded Indo-Pacific chessboard. These sites are not just runways and ports. They are signals to allies seeking reassurance, to competitors testing limits, and to Filipinos themselves, weighing security against history. The question now is no longer why the doors were opened. It is how this new posture reshapes deterrence, diplomacy, and daily life along the region's most contested waters. The U.S.-Philippines alliance is not a sudden convenience. It is a relationship shaped by memory, sacrifice, and shared threat perception. In 1951, with Asia still recovering from World War II and the Cold War hardening, Manila and Washington signed the Mutual Defense Treaty. For decades, that treaty was not just ink on paper, it was a reality. American aircraft took off daily from Clark Air Base, and U.S. naval power flowed through Subic Bay, once the largest American overseas base in the world. These installations brought security, jobs, and a visible U.S. footprint, but they also carried political weight and historical baggage tied to colonial memory and national pride. By the early 1990s, the mood had changed. The Cold War was ending, Mount Pinatubo had devastated Clark, and Filipinos were asking hard questions about sovereignty and self-reliance. When the Philippine Senate voted against renewing base leases in 1991, it was not an anti-American moment. It was a declaration of independence in strategic terms. The closures in 1992 marked a psychological turning point. The alliance would continue, but on new terms, shaped more by Filipino consent than Cold War necessity. What followed was not a divorce, but a quieter, more deliberate partnership. Without permanent bases, cooperation had to adapt.
The Visiting Forces Agreement restored the legal foundation for joint exercises, disaster response, and counterterrorism operations, allowing U.S. troops to come and go, but never stay. It was a model built on presence without permanence, familiarity without occupation. That logic deepened with the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. EDCA reflected a new reality. Threats no longer came as massed armies, but as maritime coercion, gray zone pressure, and rapid crises. Instead of bases flying foreign flags, the agreement focused on rotational access, pre-positioned equipment, and joint infrastructure inside Philippine camps. In human terms, it was a compromise, maintaining alliance credibility while respecting the hard-won lesson of the 1990s. Filipinos want partners, not landlords.
This is a JP, all right? This equipment is made to go.
This evolution explains why today's EDCA expansion feels both dramatic and familiar. It is not a return to the past, nor a break from it.
It is the alliance, reshaped by history, geography, and a shared understanding that in the Indo-Pacific, distance is shrinking, and time to react is measured in hours, not decades. At its core, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement is a workaround shaped by history. After the Philippines shut down permanent U.S. bases in the 1990s, both sides needed a way to keep the alliance credible without reopening old wounds. EDCA does exactly that. It allows U.S. forces to rotate in and out, bring equipment when needed, and help fund upgrades inside Philippine military facilities, while ownership, command, and ultimate control remain firmly with Manila. No foreign flags, no permanent barracks, no transfer of sovereignty. In practical terms, it is access without occupation, presence without permanence. What makes EDCA politically survivable in the Philippines is what it explicitly forbids: permanent U.S. bases. Every activity happens inside Philippine camps, under Philippine authority. That distinction may sound technical, but domestically it matters a lot. It is the difference between partnership and dependency, between cooperation and control. When EDCA was first implemented, 5 sites were selected, not randomly, but because they quietly reflected the Philippines' real security needs. Basa Air Base anchors air defense near Metro Manila. Fort Magsaysay, the country's largest military reservation, supports large-scale ground and joint exercises. Lumbia Airport strengthens its reach into Mindanao, long shaped by counterterrorism and disaster response. Antonio Bautista Air Base faces the West Philippine Sea directly, while Mactan Benito Ebuan Air Base serves as a central logistics and air mobility hub. These sites told a story even back then. EDCA was not about one enemy or one scenario. It was about flexibility, covering Luzon, the Visayas, Mindanao, and the country's most exposed maritime flank. EDCA is often misunderstood as a war-fighting agreement alone. In reality, its scope is broader and more human. One pillar is interoperability, making sure Filipino and American forces can actually operate together in real crises, not just on paper. Another is humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, a critical need in one of the world's most disaster-prone countries, where typhoons arrive more reliably than geopolitics. At the same time, EDCA quietly fixes things militaries need but rarely talk about publicly. Longer runways, hardened hangars, fuel storage, and logistics nodes. These upgrades serve Philippine forces first, but they also ensure that if a regional crisis erupts, at sea or in the air, response time is measured in hours, not weeks. Seen this way, EDCA is less about preparing for war and more about not being caught unprepared.
It reflects a shared judgment by Manila and Washington that in today's Indo-Pacific, deterrence, disaster response, and credibility all start with one basic question. Can you move fast enough when it matters? In February 2023,
what better example of that Filipino nobility of spirit could there be than what was once again demonstrated in the last worldwide crisis, where our men and women rose to the challenge of facing an unseen enemy, a new global challenge.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. signed off on 4 additional EDCA locations, and the timing mattered. This was not a routine bureaucratic update. It came as pressure mounted in the South China Sea. Military flights around Taiwan increased, and regional planners began asking uncomfortable questions about response time. The rationale was simple and sober. Geography leaves little margin for delay. By widening access points, the Philippines reduced its strategic blind spots and signaled that deterrence starts with being in the right place before a crisis breaks out.
Located at the northern tip of Luzon, Naval Base Camilo Osias looks directly toward Taiwan across the Luzon Strait. This is not symbolic positioning, it is operational reality. Any air or naval movement between the Pacific and the South China Sea passes nearby. Access here shortens reaction time and strengthens maritime awareness in a corridor planners quietly describe as unavoidable in a Taiwan contingency. Lal-lo Airport adds air mobility to the northern equation. Its value lies in speed, the ability to move personnel, equipment, and relief supplies quickly into northern Luzon. In military terms, it supports rapid deployment. In civilian terms, it doubles as a lifeline when disasters hit a region often exposed to typhoons. Dual use is not an afterthought here, it is the point. Set inland in northeastern Luzon, Camp Melchor Dela Cruz anchors the eastern defense posture. It provides depth, space to stage, train, and sustain operations away from the coast. Strategically, it connects northern access points with central Luzon, ensuring that defense planning is not compressed into a narrow coastal strip. Perhaps the most geopolitically sensitive site, Balabac Island sits near some of the South China Sea's most contested waters and critical sea lanes. Control of awareness here matters not just for military operations, but for trade routes that carry energy and goods across Southeast Asia. From Balabac, the map stops being abstract and starts looking like daily reality for fishermen, patrol crews, and shipping traffic. These 4 sites tell a clear story. They are not clustered, not redundant, and not accidental. They form a quiet arc, from Taiwan-facing waters in the north to contested sea lanes in the west, designed to give the Philippines and its allies options instead of ultimatums. In today's Indo-Pacific, that flexibility is not escalation, it is insurance. At the strategic level, EDCA is less about troop numbers and more about signaling. By dispersing access across multiple locations, the alliance complicates adversary planning at a time of rising pressure in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. Deterrence today is conveyed through positioning and readiness, not rhetoric. The intent, repeatedly emphasized by U.S. officials, is prevention. discouraging crises before they erupt, rather than responding after lives are already at risk. EDCA's impact is most visible during joint exercises. Drills such as Balakatan now use EDCA sites to practice amphibious, air assault, coastal defense, and rapid logistics operations. Filipino and U.S. forces train as integrated units, building habits and trust under realistic conditions. Infrastructure is the quiet backbone of the agreement. By the end of FY 2023, the United States had planned over $100 million in upgrades across EDCA locations, runways, fuel storage, hardened facilities, and logistics hubs. These improvements remain with the armed forces of the Philippines and deliver civilian benefits as well, from local jobs to faster disaster response. A runway built for military transport is the same runway that receives relief aircraft after typhoons. Equally important is what EDCA is not. There are no permanent U.S. bases, no exclusive zones, and no foreign command. Forces rotate, equipment moves, and sovereignty stays with Manila. Officials on both sides consistently stress this point because it goes to the core of national dignity. As briefings often state, these are Philippine bases, first and last. Inside the Philippines, EDCA has never been a purely military discussion. It is a deeply emotional one. Supporters within the defense establishment argue that access agreements are a practical response to a harsher security environment, not a surrender of sovereignty. Critics, however, see a familiar risk: entanglement in conflicts that Filipinos did not choose, particularly scenarios involving Taiwan or great power rivalry. Civil society groups and activists have called for stronger legislative oversight and broader public debate, reflecting a national instinct shaped by history. Alliances are acceptable, but only when autonomy is visibly protected. This tension is not weakness. It is a democracy negotiating its own red lines. For Manila, the alliance with the United States is not just about deterrence. It is about catching up. The armed forces of the Philippines have long faced capability gaps compared to regional peers, especially in air defense, maritime awareness, and joint operations. Deeper engagement brings exposure to advanced training, modern logistics standards, and operational planning that would take decades to develop alone. For many policymakers, EDCA is less about choosing sides and more about ensuring the country is not strategically naked in an unforgiving neighborhood. From Washington's perspective, the EDCA expansion fits squarely within its broader Indo-Pacific strategy: deter coercion, uphold maritime norms, and reassure allies that U.S. commitments are not seasonal. Beijing's reaction has been consistent and sharp. Chinese officials have criticized EDCA expansions as containment under another name, warning that they risk militarizing the region and undermining peace. State media has framed the sites as potential triggers in a crisis, even as Manila and Washington stress their defensive and humanitarian purpose. The contrast highlights a deeper divide. While China views expanded access through a zero-sum lens, the Philippines frames it as insurance against uncertainty, not preparation for confrontation. Across Southeast Asia, reactions have been quieter but no less attentive. Fellow ASEAN members are watching closely, aware that what happens in the Philippines could shape norms for the entire region. Many governments share the same balancing instinct: maintain economic ties with China, preserve security cooperation with the United States, and avoid being forced into binary choices. Publicly, the emphasis remains on peace, stability, and freedom of navigation, language that reflects both caution and realism. Beyond Southeast Asia, the EDCA expansion has reassured other U.S. allies. Partners such as Japan, South Korea, and Australia see the move as confirmation that alliance networks in Asia are tightening, not fraying. In a region where credibility is measured by presence, EDCA sends a quiet but unmistakable message. Coordination is deepening,
not retreating. For ordinary Filipinos, EDCA's most immediate relevance may have nothing to do with war. The country sits squarely in the path of typhoons, earthquakes, and volcanic activity. EDCA sites provide staging grounds for rapid humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Airfields that can receive heavy-lift aircraft, storage for emergency supplies, and logistics hubs that cut response times when hours matter. In past disasters, delays cost lives. Planners see EDCA as a way to make "never again" more than a slogan.
If I can, up on top of these hills, around 600 meters.
Beyond national borders, these sites enhance cooperation in search and rescue, environmental response, and regional emergency coordination. Oil spills, maritime accidents, and large-scale evacuations do not respect sovereignty lines. EDCA's dual-use nature allows military coordination to support civilian outcomes, quietly reinforcing stability without escalation. Despite official assurances, concerns persist at the local level. Some community leaders worry that foreign troop rotations could bring security risks, political backlash, or make their areas symbolic targets. Even when sovereignty is legally intact, perception matters. Managing local consent remains one of EDCA's most delicate challenges. Sites near Taiwan and contested maritime zones inevitably attract scrutiny. Critics argue that proximity itself creates risk, that in a major power confrontation, geography could pull the Philippines into events beyond its control. Supporters counter that absence of preparation would be even more dangerous. This debate cuts to the heart of national strategy, whether distance or readiness offers greater safety. Perhaps the hardest task is diplomatic. China remains one of the Philippines' largest trading partners and an unavoidable economic actor. Manila must walk a narrow path, deepening security ties with Washington while keeping channels with Beijing functional. EDCA does not eliminate this balancing act, it sharpens it. The addition of 4 new EDCA sites marks a decisive moment in the U.S.-Philippines defense cooperation. It strengthens deterrence, improves preparedness, and expands the alliance's ability to respond to both security crises and natural disasters. As great power competition continues to shape the Indo-Pacific, EDCA will remain central to how the Philippines protects itself without surrendering autonomy. The agreement is no longer just a legal framework. It is a living test of alliance management in a contested region. Ultimately, EDCA tells a broader story. Long-standing alliances do not stay frozen in time, they adapt. In the Philippines' case, that adaptation blends strategic realism with historical memory, seeking protection without submission, partnership without permanence, and stability in a region where uncertainty is the only constant.
If you like the video, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for deep analysis of contemporary issues.